In the quiet town of New Albany, in 1988, two young hearts intertwined in a love story that would eventually take a dark and unexpected turn. David Ray Camm and Kimberly Starreen, fondly known as Kim, both yearning for a lifetime together, exchanged vows in the spring of 1989. However, as the year 2000 approached, an unfathomable tragedy would shatter their seemingly perfect world, leaving behind a shocking mystery that would grip the small town and captivate investigators for years to come. Hi, and welcome back to our channel. If you are new here, please consider subscribing, as it helps us motivate to create more intriguing content for you. Let's have a look at the David Camm case. In 1988, in a town called New Albany, something special happened. A 24-year-old named David Ray Camm crossed paths with a 23-year-old named Kimberly Starreen. People who knew her well affectionately called her Kim. And that's where our story begins. David, who came from a well-known family in the area, was the man she wanted to spend the rest of her life with. Held together by their shared history in New Albany, Indiana, the pair spoke wedding vows in the spring of 1989. David's outstanding marital status at work led to his acceptance as a recruit for the Indiana State Police that same year. Soon after, he attracted attention and was hired by the Emergency Response Unit. Their family life flourished concurrently, and when their son Bradley was born on February 1, 1993, their happiness skyrocketed. But things took a turn for the worst in the summer of 1994 when David began having an affair with a young woman he met at the gym, Stephanie McCarty. Kim found this even more difficult because she was still expecting her second child. When things got even worse, David moved out of their marital house and into his mistress's. Kim took comfort in her family's support, even in the face of difficult situations. Amazingly, even David's relatives continued to be by her side. David was conspicuously absent during the birth of Kim's daughter Jillian on February 28, 1995, but the rest of the family was there. The romance ended soon after Jillian was born, which led David to pursue a reunion with Kim. Kim thought about giving her marriage another chance despite the suffering she had experienced because of her love for her husband and her responsibilities as their two children's mother. David soon went back to living with his family. The family that Kim and David chose to celebrate their family reunion was as astonished as they were by Kim's quick decision to accept him back into their life as they were by hers. David and Kim started building their new home on Georgetown, Indiana's Lockhart Road. A new chapter began when David and Kim moved into their newly constructed dream home. Although Kim was quite proud of their beautiful house, what truly brought her delight was seeing David's change. He had obviously changed a lot and spent a lot of time getting to know Brad and Jill, that is, when his work schedule permitted. For this family, things appeared to be coming together as the year 2000 approached. At Graceland Christian School, Brad, who was 7 years old, was enrolled in the second grade, while his sister Jill, who was 5 years old, was in kindergarten. Kim was doing a great job as a senior accountant at Louisville's Aegon Insurance Group. In the meantime, David's journey had changed course. He worked as a road trooper for the Indiana State Police for 11 years before deciding to join his Uncle Sam Lockhart's basement waterproofing company, which paid twice as much as his prior job. At last, the family had everything. But on September 28, 2000, fate had other ideas, ones that would turn out differently than expected. The Camm home went through its usual routine. Kim got up at 6 in the morning, and David and their kids got up soon after. About an hour later, David left for work after bidding his family farewell. After dropping Bradley and Jill off at their schools, Kim left with the kids. Kim made plans with her folks for later in the day and then headed to work. She departed at around 4 o'clock in the evening to pick up her daughter from school and go with her to dancing practice. Kim accompanied her son to swim practice at Riverside Swim Club in New Albany as the evening wore on towards 6 o'clock. Kim and the two kids left for home just after 7 o'clock in the evening. David Camm, meanwhile, arrived home at around 6 o'clock in the evening after a demanding workday, even though their home was just 11 miles away. Then, he headed to the neighboring Georgetown Community Church shortly before 7 o'clock in the evening to play a weekly game of basketball with a group of buddies. He played in that first game, then decided not to play anymore. sitting down at the baseline and talking to a well-known church elder named Tom Jolly, approximately at 9:20 p.m. David left for his house, which was 2.5 miles away, after the basketball game. He was going to find something that would rock his world completely when he pulled into the driveway. David witnessed a horrifying scene that was impossible for him to comprehend when the garage door rose, revealing his entire family had perished. David reported the unbelievable catastrophe that had befallen his family by making a 911 call to the Indiana State Police Department, where he had previously worked, at around 9:30 p.m. Among the first officers to respond when ISP officers showed up at his residence a few minutes later was David's best friend and former coworker, Sean Clemens. Sean summoned David in for a standard interview before moving further with the murder scene investigation. He stated that they should try to figure out what went wrong. When Sean asked David about what had happened, David replied that he had gone straight to the garage to park his car after returning home from the basketball game. He explained that he had discovered Kim right there on the garage floor, her clothes noticeably absent, and a large cut on her head from which blood was streaming. David recalled that he had seen the long stream of blood at that point. He had gotten down near her and had started calling out, "Here, Kim, Kim!" He mentioned that she had disappeared from view, and he had a sudden realization. Where were the kids? Where were the kids? David's heart fell as he looked into the Ford Bronco that the family had parked in the same garage. He discovered Brad and Jill, his 2 children, seated between the front and rear seats in the SUV's back seat. Like Kim, Jill was erect in the rear seat and still buckled up in her seatbelt. She had a deep cut on her skull, and it was immediately clear that she was dead, David recounted. I turned to look in the back, and that was when I saw Brad. Brad, though, had injuries on his chest. David reported that Brad, in contrast to his mother and sister, was hunched over the back seat, seemingly attempting to elude his attacker. David felt the warmth of his body against his. David felt a ray of hope come back to him at that time. Thinking that his son might still be alive, in an attempt to resuscitate him, he hastily took him out of the car and laid him gently on the concrete floor. David started CPR immediately, but sadly, it did not take long to realize that Brad had also passed away. After that, according to David, he hurried inside his home and dialed 911. He hurried back to the garage after making the call, screaming for someone to tell him what had occurred as he crossed the street to his grandfather's house. David gave a detailed narrative of everything that happened that day, and then said that, given the fact that the kids were still in the van, he thought Kim probably got home between 7:30 and 7:40 p.m. David went on to say that he thought the horrible killings happened just after they got home, but since Kim and the kids were known to have no adversaries, he was at a loss for who would have a reason to harm them. Just as David had recounted, investigators found Kim on the floor in the garage, her panties off and blood streaming from her head. Jill's body was discovered in the rear seat of the automobile, while Brad's lifeless body and the bloody pants were discovered nearby. It seemed to the cops that all 3 of them had been fatally shot by gunfire. Something strange caught attention, which added to the mystery. In addition to expressing his own confusion about the circumstances, David stressed that Kim would never have done such a thing on her own in his opening remarks to the police. A further noteworthy finding was a hoodie that had been carelessly tucked in next to Brad's lifeless corpse. There was also a palm print on the Ford Bronco door, but at the time it was unidentifiable. The continuing investigation has become even more complex as a result of these revelations. At first, the officers thought it might have been a botched heist. The fact that there were no signs of forced entry into the garage led to the rapid rejection of this scenario. Moreover, there were no indications that the attacker had tried to enter the house, and nothing seemed to have been taken from it. It appeared exceedingly unlikely that a heist could take place without the criminal ever setting foot inside the home. It was becoming more and more clear that the killer's goal was to purposefully kill Kim, Brad, and Jill rather than steal anything. Even though David had cooperated with the authorities, they were unable to believe his story as a whole. When a murder happens, it is customary police protocol to look into the husband, and there were several aspects of this case that made David the subject of suspicion. One thing that stood out was how tidy the crime scene looked. Usually, there would be footprints or other indications of disturbance when someone visits a crime scene and says they helped or interacted with it. But in David's situation, none existed. A forensic analyst also reported seeing bleach marks on the terrace of the Camm house and finding a mop and bucket inside the house. These results raised the possibility of scene manipulation in the eyes of the detectives. David had not yet been formally named a suspect, despite these concerns. The clothing and shoes David was wearing were among the items of evidence that detectives gathered from the crime scene and forwarded to a lab for additional examination. During this difficult time, both Kim's and David's families stayed strong and supported each other. Nobody blamed David for the tragic deaths of his family. They all believed he wasn't responsible for what happened. In the meantime, the victims underwent autopsies at the Kentucky Medical Examiner's Office, and the results of the examination simply confirmed what the investigators had long suspected. All three of the victims had been shot to death. Since there was no gunpowder residue discovered on Kim, the cause of death was identified as a single head wound, the exact extent of which could not be established, despite the absence of any indications of an attack. She also had numerous bruises on her body. Jill's cause of death was the same as her mother's, a head wound from a bullet. For Brad's part, the bullet that killed him entered through his left shoulder, destroyed his spinal cord, and departed through his right shoulder. Furthermore, the autopsy report kept a shocking secret from the public that would come to light only 3 days later, on October 1, 2000, a few hours after the memorial ceremony for Jill, Brad, and Kim. The authorities got in touch with David Camm and asked him to come to the Indiana State Police Department so they could question him in person. Ironically, he discovered that the very guys who had been his closest friends now viewed him with distrust. David expressed his frustration, saying if they were family brothers, sisters who loved them, would have done anything for them, and the one moment in my life where I needed somebody to do something for me, yeah, they turned their backs on me. He continued, "We have concerns about the current situation, which is why we're giving you a chance. We don't believe these accusations are true. What do you mean reports are accusing me of killing my daughter and my children?" It appears that shortly after 9 p.m. on that fatal evening, Mrs. Terry, one of David Camm's neighbors, reported hearing 3 distinct and harsh sounds emanating from the Camm residence. The investigators had a strong suspicion that these were the gunshots David had heard on his way back home. "I am merely informing you about what we did. You know, people are misunderstanding this time," David objected. David was certain there had to be a mistake in the time frame. The bloodstains on David's shirt were the next piece of evidence, so the investigators turned their attention to it. One of the detectives stated that it was the presumptive test indicating high-velocity blood spatter. They explained that the only way to trigger such a result is through a gunshot blowback or blowout. This, they said, is why it appears on their T-shirt, which indicates that they played bowling. It is interesting to note that 8 minuscule blood spots discovered on David's shirt that evening were consistent with high-velocity blood spatter, according to a forensic analyst who was present at the crime scene. This is unusual, and usually happens when a gun goes off close to the hand, suggesting that David might have shot someone nearby. One of the detectives inquired about what to do when they were told that and expressed the need to figure out why. They mentioned the idea of locating another specialist. The detectives chose to present their most important piece of evidence, even though David persisted in sticking to his version of events and insisted that they were all mistaken. As it turned out, Jill's genitals had sustained blunt force injuries, which is consistent with molestation that most likely happened a few hours after her murder. It goes without saying that the investigator suspected David of being the one behind it. David angrily argued that it was when it happened, emphasizing that he was not responsible. He expressed his disagreement with the others, particularly addressing Mickey, and challenged their assessment. David repeatedly stated that they were wrong and that something was not right, urging them to fix it. This interview resulted in David's arrest and subsequent charges of 3 counts of murder, despite his adamant denial. Anticipatedly, David entered a not guilty plea to every accusation. Even though it seemed like everything was working against David Camm, He had one extremely solid piece of evidence working in his favor: his flawless alibi from the basketball game. David was present that evening, according to 11 other basketball players, including his own Uncle Sam Lockhart. The defense questioned Uncle Sam Lockhart, saying, "How sure are you that David Camm was here for the entire 2 hours and changed that you were here?" Sam Lockhart answered, 100 sure, because I saw him walking on the side, and I saw him sitting down." Sam Lockhart never once accepted David's guilt, and neither did the rest of his family. Rather, they thought that the police had not conducted a sufficiently in-depth inquiry. The defense asked, "Is it possible that you just did not notice that he slipped out for 25, 30 minutes? Sam Lockhart shot back, saying, "No, he was arrested 3 days after the murders. How thorough of an investigation can you do in 3 days?" I believe that once they passed the point where they could go back, their egos and political goals started to get involved, he continued. The prosecution painstakingly built their case as David Camm languished in jail, awaiting trial. Their theory was based on the idea that, on that fateful night, David had attacked and killed his family between 9:23 and 9:30 p.m., just before dialing 911. But this theory would not last long. On January 14, 2002, David Camm's trial got underway in Floyd County, with a jury selected from Johnson County. Public interest in the case increased as a result of the killings of Kim, Brad, and Jill Camm, which had already had a significant impact on the small Indiana community. Thus, Michael McDaniel, the defense lawyer, knew full well that during the trial, all eyes would be on the courthouse, with special attention on his client. A substantial alteration in the chronology posed a problem for the detective's first hypothesis. According to the autopsy report, the killings took place between 7:30 and 8 p.m. This information might have helped David's case, but the prosecution had other ideas. They proposed that, after leaving the basketball court undetected a few minutes earlier, David drove home to carry out the killings, carefully changed and tampered with the crime scene, and then went back to the court to play in a cool, collected manner. Afterwards, he went home after the game and dialed the police. The prosecution, however, said that David had planned the entire series of events and had used his familiarity with police work to establish an alibi in order to deceive the authorities. With the other players preoccupied with their games and the short distance between the church and David's house, he had a window of opportunity to carry out this plan unobserved. The main prosecutor, Stan Faith, presented more evidence to bolster this claim. A phone log attested to David's having made a business call from home at 7:19 p.m., just minutes before Kim and the kids got home. This disproved David's explanation that he was not at home at the time. 5 weeks after the shocking discovery of the 7:19 p.m. phone call, defense lawyer McDaniel unveiled a shocking development of his own. He said that it was difficult for the phone provider to record the time precisely. The phone record showed a different time than what was actually happening, which happened to be an hour apart. This confusion resulted from Indiana being one of 2 states with 2 different time zones. While the systems of the cell phone provider ran in one time zone, David Camm's home was in another. As per the testimony of a phone company employee, there was a computer fault which resulted in an inaccurate time on the bill. The individual clarified that David had actually called at 6:19 p.m., which was much before his family had returned home. Even though the prosecution's case might have seemed difficult, they still had one more card to play. The microscopic blood droplets on David's t-shirt and Kim's blood on David's sneaker, they claimed, were proof positive from science. The prosecution said that this proved any plausible question, that David was the criminal. The defense hired a bloodstain expert who testified that David may have leaned down to retrieve his son's body from the SUV, which is where the 8 drips on his shirt came from. Epstein said that it is possible that David's shirt came in contact with Jill's bleeding hair tips, causing these stains. In order to bolster this assertion, he went so far as to perform a demonstration with stage blood and a wig to show how these bloodstains could have moved to the shirt. However, not enough hard data was available to support this theory with certainty. In court, Marcy McLeod, a friend of Kim Camm, was called as a witness by the prosecution. She testified on the stand, stating that during their last conversation, Kim had mentioned that history is repeating itself without providing further details. Marcy interpreted this statement to mean that David had returned to his prior extramarital affairs. She emphasized that this remark strongly suggested intent and remarked, "From a legal standpoint, we are illustrating what was going through this man's mind long before the murders and how long it took for these intentions to develop and culminate in the events we witnessed on September 28th. In relation to Jill's alleged abuse, it was one of the most contentious topics of discussion. According to the medical examiner, Dr. Tracy Corey, the act occurred between 12 and 24 hours before her death. She stated, when her clothing was being removed, blood was immediately observed, causing a pause in the autopsy room. All sources confirmed that David had not seen Jill after 7 a.m. on the day of her murder. She mentioned at that moment, "We initiated the sexual assault examination. It would have been impossible for David to have sexually assaulted her if the incident had occurred more than 12 hours after her demise, as he would not have had access to her. However, if it had occurred within a day, the circumstances would have been different." David Camm angrily denied ever having anything to do with this horrible act. "I said, 'What are you talking about? This is my 5-year-old daughter, and I did not molest her, and I did not kill her.' The state found it very difficult to prove that David had abused his daughter, so David was never prosecuted for it. But during the trial, people continued to talk about it. On March 17, 2002, the jury ultimately returned a verdict following discussions that lasted for almost 2 months. After a 3-day trial, David Camm was declared guilty. This result sparked a tremendous response. Given that 11 witnesses had testified that David was present at the basketball game, David's family was furious that the jury had reached an incorrect conclusion. But when it came to Kim's family, things were very different. They had not at first accepted that their son-in-law was involved in their daughters' and their grandchildren's murders. But as the case progressed, Janice and Frank Wren, Kim's parents, grew more and more certain that their son-in-law was, in fact, a murderer. The Camm family persisted in their endeavors, especially his older siblings Donnie and Julie Camm. Catherine Leal, a fresh defense lawyer, entered the fray head-on and filed appeals for a new trial. David Camm received a sentence of 195 years in jail on April 11, 2002, which was about a month later. The Indiana Court of Appeals reversed the conviction in August 2004. The court found the judge's admission of adultery evidence to be highly reproachable. Keith Henderson, the newly designated prosecutor, refiled charges against David Camm in November 2004. This time, there was an additional twist that would shatter the case as a whole. A crucial piece of evidence that had been lying in wait for the entire time. Remember the gray sweatshirt we described finding at the scene of the crime? It turned out that it was never looked into in detail, but it did include 2 important pieces of evidence: DNA containing bloodstains and the word backbone engraved inside the collar. A portion of the DNA matched Kim and Brad, but the other genetic material belonged to a lady and a guy who were still unidentified. It was all not like David Camm. It is surprising that the government database of known convicts and this mysterious DNA sample were never cross-referenced. Prosecutor Keith Henderson was determined to find the truth before the first trial, so he had the laboratory re-examine all the evidence. I had no idea what we were going to find. What they found completely reshaped the case. The male DNA was matched to Charles Darnell Boney, a recently released felon from jail, but the identity of the female DNA remained unknown. It is interesting to note that Boney went by the nickname Backbone, which was also printed on the sweatshirt collar that was discovered at the site. Charles Boney, a resident of New Albany, has a disturbing criminal past that included numerous violent crimes against women. His conviction for armed robbery and attempted abduction occurred in 1992. For crimes, he received a 20-year prison sentence. Boney was released on parole from prison on June 19, 2000, after serving less than 10 years in prison. Boney's dramatic entry into the Camm case seemed to bring some much-needed clarification on the crime scene, especially in relation to Kim's puzzling shoe placement atop the Bronco. Charles Boney's unsettling fixation with feet earned him the infamous moniker the Shoe Bandit. He had a past of robbing ladies of their shoes, frequently taking just one pair from each victim. Boney openly said he liked something unusual when he was asked. He mentioned, honestly, for those who don't know the story, I have a strong liking for it. Following Boney's discovery on February 17, 2005, Louisville Metro police officers took him to the Floyd County Prosecutor's Office to conduct an interview. He was not a suspect yet, but the investigators were interested in him because they wanted to know how Boney's shirt got into the Camm's garage. When Boney first saw the gray hoodie, he admitted that it belonged to him, but stated that in July or August of 2000, he gave the item to a Salvation Army drop box as a charitable donation. He maintained that he did not even know David Camm, and that he had no idea how his hoodie ended up at the crime scene. But Boney turned out to be lying when put through a polygraph test. He was nevertheless freed, while law officials continued to monitor him closely by installing a tracking device on his car. It was shocking to learn that Boney's car had been located near the gravesite of the victims the following day. The tracking device also revealed that Boney's car passed David Camm's place of employment by less than half a mile, adding to the suspicions regarding his involvement in the crime. The female DNA found on the sweatshirt also produced a match, giving the murder investigators another lead in the interim. This led the authorities to a young woman named Malay Singh Mattingly in Trinidad. The fact that the unnamed female's DNA recovered on Boney's hoodie matched hers raised more questions about Charles Boney. As it happened, Mala was Boney's girlfriend when the killings occurred, but their passion did not last long. After confirming a perfect match between Boney's prints and the handprint found on Camm's car exterior, the latent print examiner helped the police eventually apprehend Charles Boney on March 4, 2005. Charles Boney claimed that he was not the murderer and stated that he would prefer to take his own life than harm children. In the beginning, the defense viewed Boney's arrest as a victory. Shortly afterward, David was released on bond, and the murder allegations against him were dropped. His family was thrilled to hear that he was no longer facing any accusations for the first time in many years. David mentioned, "My initial assumption was that we had found the person, and it's all over." He expressed his optimism that this would be the end of his legal problems. Unfortunately, the respite was fleeting. Officers with warrants in hand quickly apprehended David again. They told him he was being recharged, and that since they thought David and Boney were complicit in the crime, he would now be charged with conspiracy as well. David had a little taste of freedom, but he was back in jail very immediately. Prosecutor Keith Henderson explained that he did not want David Camm to go and clarified that they could not allow David to remain free due to concerns that he might attempt to escape. He mentioned having a client who had been found guilty and sentenced to 195 years, which equated to a natural life sentence. David Camm denied ever knowing Charles Boney when asked if he knew him. Charles Boney, however, altered his statement after his detention, initially denying any previous acquaintance with David Camm. He stated, "No, never laid eyes on him. No." According to Boney, he first met David in July 2000 while playing basketball at a nearby park. Additionally, he claimed that they never spoke on the phone. Instead, they would meet in front of the convenience store Kareem's Meat Market, which was managed by Debbie Wren, Camm's younger sister. During one of these meetings, David asked Boney if he could help him acquire a clean, untraceable firearm, specifically a handgun. Boney asserted that despite being aware of David's past as an ISP trooper, he still trusted him enough to obtain a firearm. Boney stated that he contacted his longtime friend Gary Gherkin, who lived in Louisville, and proceeded to purchase a .380 caliber handgun. Boney explained that the gun had been sold to David at the same Kareem's parking lot on the afternoon of the killings. He mentioned transporting it inside his sweatshirt, specifically the infamous Backbone sweatshirt. He noted that this was how that hoodie ended up in the garage, confirming the connection. He confirmed that he had followed David to his residence out of curiosity and had stayed with him for at least 15 minutes. According to Boney's account, when they arrived at the Camm residence, he positioned himself outside the garage next to his vehicle, Boney claimed to have observed David entering the garage after Kim and the children had returned home. He recalled hearing David speaking more loudly, and then suddenly, out of nowhere, he heard a pop, followed by another pop, and then a third pop. The question was asked if there were sounds resembling gunshots, to which Boney responded affirmatively. It was claimed that David confronted Boney as he emerged from the garage, pointing the firearm at him and attempting to fire it, only to discover it was malfunctioning. According to Boney, David appeared to panic when the gun jammed and failed to discharge. It was mentioned that despite the life-threatening situation that had transpired, Boney seized the opportunity to follow David into the garage, raising the question who would pursue someone who had just attempted to kill another person. Why not give chase? And it is okay if someone does not think that. Boney said he tripped over Kim's shoes during the incident. He scooped them up and arranged them nicely on top of the car while doing this. And then, out of pure curiosity, Boney leaned inside the car to have a look inside. He was looking at Jill and Brad inside the automobile when he said that his palm print had unintentionally gotten on the car. Was it possible that he had observed Brad and Jill dead inside the vehicle? He replied affirmatively, before deciding to depart, effectively leaving the area. Charles Boney and David Camm were both accused on March 9, 2005, with 3 counts of murder and 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder. Boney in New Albany and Camm in Booneville, 100 miles away, were to stand trial simultaneously for the same offense, but in separate states. On January 10, 2006, Boney began his trial by restating his earlier testimony, which stated that he had sold David Camm a rifle and then watched as he killed his entire family. There were several contradictions in Boney's story, and no records, documents, witnesses, or other sources provided any kind of cooperation or supporting evidence. The jury found it difficult to believe that he had no direct involvement in the killings. Boney was finally found guilty on January 26, 2006, of both the Camm family killings and the murderous conspiracy. His part in the horrible murders earned him a 225-year sentence on February 23, 2006. On January 17, 2006, David Camm's second trial got underway. The molestation of Jill Camm and the examination of blood spatter patterns were the main foci of the trial. Experts for the prosecution maintain that David was guilty of both pieces of evidence, while experts for the defense offered arguments as to why he wasn't. How does it feel to learn about such accusations? On March 3, 2006, the jury found David guilty of killing his family members twice. David Camm was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of release on March 29, 2006. David Camm, still maintaining his belief in his innocence, asked, "How can you convince people today, from this location, that you are an innocent man?" He added at this point, "Richard, people have formed an opinion, and they either believe in me or they don't. I have undergone 2 trials, and I have been convicted twice." He continued to assert his innocence with his family at his side. Susie and Donald Camm, his parent, had invested heavily, mortgaging nearly all their possessions to finance their unwavering quest for justice. David mentioned that, at that point, he had once again appealed his conviction. He emphasized the prejudicial nature of the molestation allegations and the absence of concrete evidence firmly linking him to the injuries. In a significant turn of events in June 2009, the Indiana Supreme Court reversed his second conviction. During prison interviews, he persistently claimed that Charles Boney had fabricated his account in an attempt to incriminate him in the crime, and he felt he was paying for Boney's sins. He described the emotional response to the court's decision as people weeping and shouting with pure, unbridled joy. When asked if he was prepared to go through this once more, he responded affirmatively, saying, "Yes, definitely." The court came to the conclusion that the allegation that David had abused his daughter lacked sufficient substantial proof. The Indiana Supreme Court appointed Jonathan A. Dart, a Spencer Circuit judge, as a special judge to oversee David Camm's third trial in July 2010. Since shortly after David's initial conviction in 2002, Catherine Lyle had been his primary defense lawyer. However, she withdrew from the case because of her growing obligations to her family and her legal profession. So, Richard Kamen, a defense lawyer from Indianapolis, took on David's case for his third trial. Stacy Juliana, who had been part of David's defense team in the second trial, joined forces with Camm to provide assistance in the third trial. They were faced with the question of the pressure they felt as defense lawyers while working to secure David's exoneration. In February 2011, the defense filed a motion to have the prosecutor from the second trial, Keith Henderson, removed. Their basis for this request was the discovery that Henderson had agreed to write a book about the Camm family shooting in exchange for an upfront payment of $4,000. As a result, when Stanley Lefkoe was appointed as a special prosecutor for David Camm's trial in February 2012, he had to become well-versed in the case's 13-year history. He explained that they were presenting the evidence to the best of their ability. When asked how this compared to the usual quantity of boxes, he responded that it was quite extensive. He mentioned that he had never personally handled a case with this much evidence. The third trial commenced in Lebanon, Indiana, on August 19, 2013, and a significant event was Charles Boney's testimony. This trial revisited a substantial amount of evidence from previous trials, including discussions of blood spatter and Jill's molestation. However, what made this trial particularly unique were the numerous surprising revelations. The prosecution claimed that Kim Camm had a motive related to the life insurance policies she had purchased a few months before her death, suggesting these policies served as the primary incentive for the crime. In response, the defense emphasized that Kim was not the only one with insurance. David had also purchased life insurance for himself. Notably, it was highlighted that the expert, Stites, lacked specialization in blood spatter or crime scene reconstruction and was essentially on par with a crime scene photographer. Despite his limited experience, Stites had expressed his ideas, which ultimately played a crucial role in linking David to the case. Consequently, the defense argued that Stites' beliefs lacked the authenticity necessary to be accepted as credible testimony in court. In October 2013, the jury declared that it had been a hard-fought battle and they had fought heroically for Mr. Camm's life and freedom. This declaration led to David Camm's exoneration after 13 years of legal battles. The jury expressed their gratitude on behalf of Mr. Camm and his family for the diligent work done in the pursuit of justice. On October 29, 2013, David Camm was officially released from incarceration after more than 10 years in prison. It marked the end of a tumultuous legal journey for a man who had consistently asserted his innocence. In an emotional interview following his release, David expressed that it was overwhelming. He continued by saying that he was just happy it was over so he could move on with his life, reconnect with his family, and start the healing process. When asked about those who still believed he was responsible for the deaths, David responded that he would tell them they were wrong. He addressed those who maintained their belief in his guilt, stating that they were mistaken and that he had not committed the crimes of murdering his family members or abusing his daughter. David Camm persisted in claiming his innocence, and his case continues to rank among the most convoluted and contentious in the history of the criminal court system. The case has attracted a lot of interest from the public and media, igniting discussions over the validity of the evidence, the significance of DNA testing, and the possibility of erroneous convictions. Following his release, David Camm made an effort to start again by getting back in touch with his loved ones and attempting to mend the severe scars that years of legal turbulence had left behind. His experience serves as a sobering reminder of the difficulties experienced by people who have been falsely charged, as well as the significance of an equitable and just justice system. That is the story of the killings of the Camm family and the intricate court dispute that ensued. This case continues to spark controversy and discussion and has left a lot of unanswered issues. Share your thoughts about this case in the comments section. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.